Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Madness Entertainment Group presents the Madness Comic Network with original programming and additional comic-related content.
Hey, we want to shout out to our sponsors, Daytona Beach Comic Con. If you are a fan of comic books, if you're a fan of comic book conventions, and if you like meeting comic book creators and getting comics and comic-related stuff, then you need to make your plans to attend Daytona Beach Comic Con. This year's show is September 9th and 10th. Silverline will be there, so you should make your plans to be there too. We'll see you there. If you like comics and find yourself in the Orlando, Florida area, doesn't everyone come to Orlando at some point in time to see the House of Mouse? But when you're here, you need to make it a point to visit Coliseum of Comics, especially the one on East Colonial Drive. They carry Silverline comics, even a limited edition Coliseum of Comics version of our comics. So, when you go, be sure to ask for Silverline Comics and tell them we sent you. OCD stands for Orlando Collector Deviants. OCD, Steve and Trish, they're a family of geeks who promote geek things, particularly those around the Orlando, Florida area. They're big supporters of Silverline, and we think you should be supporters of theirs too. Go give them some love. If you are an independent comic book maker and you need to get your independent comics made, you need to look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our books, and they do a bang-up job. They're not only trusted by Silverline, but many, many independent comic book makers. Head on over to kablam.com and see for yourself just how easy it is to have your comic printed by them. And tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kilber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday nights as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
And here we are, creating beyond calculation, beyond politics, beyond the big two. Welcome, Silverliners, to the wonderful world of Wednesday Wham. Boy, do we have a special show for you folks tonight. I'm your host, Dean Zachary, and we're joined by Barbara J. Kilberg, the Empress of the Inks, Rob Davis, also known as the Paragon of Pencils, the Superior Skeptic, Aaron Humphreys, also known as Harumphreys, Wizards of Wordplay, Rory Boyle, and Scott Wakefield. We got the team with us tonight, and possibly an appearance by the word bomber, John Medic. But most importantly, we have a special guest tonight.
Oh, I can't stand it any longer.
It's Paul Kupperberg, ladies and gentlemen. Paul Kupperberg, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We got to thank Barb for cornering this special guest tonight. Thank you, Barb. Kudos
Barb.
to you for cooking him something great, or I don't know.
We go way back. He was my editor at DC.
Oh, how nice! And I'm going to ask all the stories about all the dirt. So, Paul, I'm going to just sort of open the floor up here, but since Barb was kind enough to arrange this, I'm going to let her start by giving us a little bit of background about how she first met you and started working for DC, and then we'll just go from there and start asking questions. Barb, take the floor.
Well, I don't exactly remember how we met, but I do know that I jumped over there from Malibu, and Paul and Kevin Dooley would throw me anything and everything, and I certainly appreciated that because being a consistent inker, female inker for DC for a good decade was quite a treat. Now, Marvel, I inked for Marvel, but they would only give me things like Barbie and She-Hulk and Gargoyles.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah,
Gargoyles is cool.
Let's make it a
Yeah.
comeback.
Paul just threw me anything and everything, and I think a lot of it had to do is because I made every deadline.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
And
awesome.
I
Paul,
never missed a
what were
deadline.
you editing at the time that you gave Barb her first assignment? Do you remember the book
I don't remember the book, but it may have been some Flash stuff.
Okay.
Did you do
Yeah.
Primal Force with me?
No, Primal Force was. I don't remember who
I did
edited
Impulse.
Impulse. She did Impulse.
Impulse. That's it. That was it.
I
That's it.
spent 2.5
That was it.
years on Impulse.
That's right.
Wow.
It was the only time I ever had a contract with DC.
Oh wow.
Well, I want to cover everything that we can in our limited time that you've participated in, Paul. But just to get us started, when you were at DC as an editor, what books did you edit, and to help educate those that are watching us tonight, what were you looking for when you were recruiting talent? So I'll let you sort of take the floor there.
I was looking for talent. I was looking for someone who could do the job well and do it on time. I mean, those are the first two concerns. The level of you establish. You find out how good somebody is. Barbara, she did the job and she did it well and she did it on time. I mean, what more can I ask for? I mean, I know she was a girl, but I let her to the house anyway and draw comics.
You didn't hold that against her.
Yeah, no. I mean, so
in those days before we could, email portfolios and post our artwork online and so on.
Mailed in samples.
It was mailed in samples. Yeah. And it was also networking.
I had a big stack of them on my windowsill. Yeah.
And did you tell us a little bit about portfolio reviews? Like, was it primarily people coming into the offices in those days? Was it only at cons?
I think I met him at San Diego Comic-Con, either that or Chicago Con.
Yeah, it was. I think it was at San Diego. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure.
I rounded up most of my work from San Diego back in the day. You can't do that anymore.
I did
and
too.
There's a lot of alcohol involved, so I'm not.
Yeah.
Bernie Wrightson knew how to throw a party.
Yeah. Well, in those days, Paul, you mentioned Kevin Dooley. Kevin actually gave me my first DC gig, and it was actually a Green Lantern gig.
Yeah, I did with him too.
It was an Elseworld story, and it was fantastic. That was my big break into DC. So kudos to him if he was a buddy of yours.
Well, who didn't like Kevin? I mean,
right. I know there was alcohol involved. But
just that one night. Just that one night, and I ain't telling anymore.
I remember once in Chicago there was way too much alcohol involved, and you were there that night. I think somebody, I can't remember who, had to walk me back to my hotel room because I was like, I was gone.
It's good you remember it though.
Yeah, at least I remember.
It was Bernie Wrightson was hosting that event at BarCon after the after the show, and it was fueled. I mean, like we were all just sitting around the bar and having fun, but at some point you forget what you're having fun at.
I paid for it the next day, though.
The
only time I ever came close to missing a day at a convention.
I had two. One was at UCAC, where John Romita Jr. got me so wasted. You know, in England,
how did we get off on alcohol?
Just see how it goes off the rails sometimes, Rob, and then I'm here to pull us back. And pull. I want to touch on some things, Paul, in terms of editing then and how the stories were crafted for creative teams, because it's fair to say, I think Barb might agree, and you may or may not agree, that in those days it was common to have a creative team be on a book for a lot longer than a 4-issue or a 6-issue. Yeah. Sometimes guys would be on a book, or ladies, whoever the team was, would be on a book for a year or even longer.
Or longer,
and things obviously
there
started
were people who were on
change.
books for 10 and 15 years. You know,
right, back in the day. Yeah. So, in other words, was the litmus test in those days, if it works and it ain't broke, don't fix it with a creative team? Is that pretty much what you guys? Okay.
I guess. I mean, you know, I was in no hurry to you know, when I had a winning team on a book, even if it was just winning because they were on time and I didn't have to listen to some idiot yell at me at the Wednesday afternoon editorial meeting. If you'll ask after the show, I'll tell you who the idiot was. But
can we get people to pay, and then we'll put it live on the show?
We'll do a paywall. Yeah. But you know, so right there, that was a plus. Right. But you know, I tended to go for people whose work I liked, whose stuff who I trusted. You know, I wasn't a hands-on, you know, a heavy hands-on editor. I was looking, you know, let the writer write his story. He may need help sometimes in finding a direction or fixing a problem or something, and I'm happy to help. But otherwise, it ain't my story. So, you know, let them do it. And I can't draw. And besides, who am I to tell, you know, Paul Ryan or John Byrne or Mike Diodato how to draw? You know?
Yeah.
Oh, Tatiana Wood, let me explain coloring to you. No. You know?
No.
What about the trick is to hire good people and get out of their way.
Well, that's right. Yeah. That's how I felt about working. And most of the editors were that way. What was continuity control like? Was there an overarching feel for the particular stable of books that you were running at the time? Did you guys have an overrunning story arc that kept the writers in line, or was it a free for all? Do whatever you need to do.
It wasn't a free for all. I mean, you know, stories were discussed before they were written. Okay. But usually, if you know, I don't know, Grant Morrison and Mark Miller come to me with a Flash plot, it's probably going to be okay. You know.
Yeah.
So.
You know, would they pitch?
I would read it, and I would say, you know, hey, what about this or that, or maybe you want to think about doing this instead. And you know, sometimes they'd go, yes, sure. I mean, I'm not just talking about them, but any writer. You know, if I had to work that hard, if I have to work too hard with a writer, I might as well write the thing myself.
Right.
And you did write a few things yourself.
You did.
You have quite a writing credit with DC.
Oh yeah. Run through a few of the titles just so folks listening can know what you've worked on for DC.
There was Superman, Supergirl, Superboy, Arion, Lord of Atlantis, the Doom Patrol. Boy, I must have written some other stuff.
Checkmate.
Green Lantern.
I seem to remember Checkmate.
Checkmate, right. And
I love that book.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in the 70s and early 80s, pre-crisis, I was just like all over the place. I wrote, you know, most of the characters in the DCU at some point. You know, I got to put my hands on them.
And you killed off a few too.
And I killed a few, sure. They were asking for it.
Paul Kupperberg.
I like to kill the birds. Vigilante, right? Another title.
Vigilante, Peacemaker.
I love that
Peacemaker, right? Right. So, I wrote many, and you know, I went on to do stuff for other people, you know, and from Archie to Brad Simpson and
Archie. You know,
a man who killed Archie.
I know we're gonna touch on that, but before we get away from DC, I was gonna ask a question. Comes up in our streams quite often, and we talk about how to
Doctor,
make.
Why is it this color? No, that's
yeah, sometimes, but usually it's more conceptual in terms of how do we make our characters more interesting? How do we make them more compelling? And a lot of times we start talking about established characters, and we'll say, you know, it just seems like people have trouble writing Superman. So you're the person I really want to ask this. Was it more difficult to write Superman than the other characters? And okay, you're shaking your head. No, it wasn't more difficult.
No, Superman is great. Superman, if you can't find a way to write Superman, you know, I heard a lot of people saying things like, we just don't know what to do with him anymore. Well, then you're an idiot. Because
that's my
point. Yes. Tell us how you really feel.
Trust me, dear.
I've never known him to hold back.
You know, I mean, if you go nowhere else, just look at those last lines from the Superman TV show. You know, truth, justice in the American way.
Yeah.
Proceed.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I think most people think that he's such a Boy Scout that he has no conflict.
Well, that's because for most of his existence, he was written that way. You know, including me. I mean, you know, I tried to do a little bit more. I was on the book in the last few years before Crisis when everything, you know, changed. But you know, he is a Boy Scout. That's part of the appeal. But you know, you can write 2 or 3 Boy Scout stories, and then you need to, you know. Eventually, I found a few stories here and there where I thought I got at the character as opposed to just writing about him. You know, but again, that was, you know, that's what, 30 plus years ago.
Right.
I think I can do a better job now, you know, because I actually have something to say and have acquired some skill as a writer.
Sure. Well, we get that a lot. You know, the guy, you folks will support me on this. It's a discussion all the time, you know, where we think the Boy Scout style characters, people seem to either deconstruct them or change them, and they have trouble with that ethos, I guess, making it believable. And sort of now that we're all sophisticated and post-millennial, and we don't really do the truth, justice, and the American way thing anymore. We're way too advanced for that. And I always think, well, that's kind of silly. I mean, there's always a story you can tell, you know, about Superman doing what Superman does.
But it's an interesting, you know, phenomenon when you're dealing with a character, you know, ongoing serialized fiction with a character for over 80 years. John Byrne and I were once talking about, we were grumbling about, you know, they're not doing Superman right, you know, they're not doing my Superman, you know, and at some point I realized that, you know, we probably didn't do Superman right either. We did our Superman, we did it on the shoulders of all the Supermans that came before us by all the other creators, but the only people who ever got Superman right were Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster.
Yep.
After that, we're all just interpreting what they intended, and who the hell knows what that was, other than we should make a living.
Yeah, excellently put.
Yeah.
I want to open up the floor. I'm sure other folks have questions. We're going to start with one of the wizards of wordplay over there, who's looking like he's ready to ask a question. Mr. Scott Wakefield, also known as Swake. Surely you have a question for this gentleman who is a treasure trove of wisdom about comics, and you're a relative neophyte. Man, go. I
am, and relative is very true in this this illustrious group that I'm with. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. We've had a few episodes on our show here about professionalism and the craft and making it in the industry. And writing is a really, really difficult industry to be in. If you don't have to go on too long, but what tips do you have for writers as far as getting in the industry and staying in the industry and keeping it professional? And what do you see as big goof ups that young people or people trying to get into the industry are running into?
Well,
all right. Hey, whoa. Let me write. Can you hold that for just a second?
Follow-up question.
I'll write that.
I might have a few thoughts on the subject. It's really just a matter of learning how to interpret people. As you're writing a character, things come up, and there's no way you could think about these things when you're conceiving the character. Who knew he was going to run into this situation? I'm writing a thing now where this chapter is 3 times longer than it needed to be because I kept coming up with like, oh well, this works with the character. This will add to it. And I may be wrong and may wind up taking half of it out, but it's still it's a discovery process, and you have to believe in your character. You can't write a character. You have to write a person. Mm-hmm. You have to understand that person. That's really it. Like, it's hard in superhero comics to do this because they can't be real. Like in the whole history of the world, no one has ever put on a costume and gone out to fight crime. Ever.
Right.
Well, not successfully.
Ever. What does this tell you about the idea?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's goofy.
So,
yep.
Right. So real people don't do it. So the people who do it, well, the only way I could convincingly continue writing this stuff, after Superman and all that stuff, which was kind of had this whole pre-crisis had this childhood hold on me. I discovered this stuff in, I've been reading comics since 1959, before I could read them, and so these old things, Julie Schwartz and his comics and Mort Weisinger and Murray Boltinoff, these have true meaning to me, and so it's hard to kind of be objective about them even. But then once you get past, once I stopped writing that and started focusing more on characters like Vigilante or Checkmate without the superpowers, it was like, well, this is a lot easier because I don't have to try to imagine what a guy who can fly can think like, or, all this. I just have to write this guy. Yeah, he wears a costume. And yes, he's crazy because he wears a costume. Right. Like the second, I know Marv conceived of Vigilante as a, kind of a superhero kind of thing, but he's not, and when I took over the book, I try to keep costumes out of it as much as possible, and go on the assumption that this guy is insane. I mean, he's, he comes across as reasonable, but it's like, and then I put on a costume and I go out and shoot people at night.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, nice meeting you.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, but I can get into that head. I
sure.
can, but to get into,
because you kill so many people. I mean,
I've killed Barb, and I've wanted to kill even more.
See, yeah. So
I wrote a story
we
called
put up with
for an anthology published by Crazy 8 Press, which I'm associated with, and the anthology was called "They Keep Killing Glenn," and every story was about everybody killing one of our members, Glenn Howman, and I wrote a story that was like Groundhog's Day.
Oh.
So that I got to kill him thousands and thousands of times.
Oh, wow. Genius.
Yeah. So, I can understand.
They killed Kenny.
They killed Kenny. Again, this is sort of a segue similar to Scott's question here. What level of fantasy, I know it depends on the character, but we often talk about this on the stream as well, this level of the suspension of disbelief, and then the percentage of fantasy and realism that you're constantly walking a tightrope when you're taking these characters through their adventures as people, as you so rightly say. How much realism do you want to put in a comic? I mean, do you want it to become a police procedural if you're writing Vigilante? Does it depend on the story?
But I do want them to get reality correct. And they don't. You read these stories where there's some legal, thing at the center of the story, and it's like, well, that's not how the real trial works. You know, you don't just stand up in the middle of court and go, "No, we have proof he did it." Oh, charges dismissed. Everybody go home. You know, it doesn't work that way. And that's, you know, it's on the smaller stuff that they get it wrong all the time. And it's all, they don't bother keeping it real. You know, people don't, you know, it's like, I think back, everybody, you know, Fantastic Four. First 100 issues of Fantastic Four are considered, you know, one of the greatest runs of comics ever. In reality, it's only issue like number 42 through 80 something. But still, the first 100 issues, A-okay. But I tried to reread the first 100 issues of Fantastic Four just for the hell of it. And by issue 19, I was just like, I couldn't do this anymore. You know, it was fine back then, but now you've got this, like, is the whole apartment made of asbestos? Because Johnny sits around the living room watching, you know, listening to the stereo, and you know,
and his fingers on fire.
Yeah. And instead of Ben, you know, knocking on doors, he routinely punches through walls, and everybody goes, "Oh, Ben!" And then Reed, it was I don't know, it was something to do with aliens, and the splash panel is Reed going, "Why, this proves that there's life in outer space." And I go, "Well, you've already met the Skrulls and the Impossible Man. What are you talking?" So, you know, all of this stuff is just like nobody's paying attention. And then, you know, even the greatest story ever in the FF, the Galactus story, how does it end? They don't know. So Stan pulls a thing out of his ass called the Ultimate Nullifier. Yeah. Like, oh, well, that's disappointing. Go home, you know. Right?
So you're right. Since we're walking into this trap here, I always laugh when people try to, you know, criticize
or rationalize,
or a DC situation where, oh, well, imagine if Superman was fighting, you know, in the city and all these people, it's smashing into buildings, all these people die. But when it happens in an Avengers story, oh, well, you know, it's the Avengers. You got to kind of let it go. I'm like going, oh, wait a second, guys. But then in a way, that's a backhanded compliment, because what they're saying is DC is more real, right? Or they're trying to be more real. So there's a level of realism that they expect almost from the DCU, where Marvel is almost considered more real in terms of places and people having problems. But it seems like, as far as, at least in the movies anyway, the Tesseract made it happen. You know, that little magic box that everyone is racing. Just, you know, the Tesseract.
I mean, you know, like go back to Lord of the Rings. You know, it's all about a little dinky ring, you know?
Right. So there's a lot more magic, even though it's in the real world. But then you go to DC and they do something crazy and people go, "Oh, that's unrealistic." He was, you know, Superman would never let that many people die. He would, you know, those buildings got destroyed. It's like, I don't know.
And he wouldn't.
That's weird.
Superman would take the fight out into the country or out over the ocean. He did it all through the, you know, the death of Superman. That's how he fought Doomsday.
Yeah,
you know?
Took him out into space.
Take it away from populated areas.
Right.
You know, it's a difference in how style. You know, Marvel gets away with a lot just for being Marvel, and you know, fans are insane anyway. I don't understand people imbuing, you know, putting so much energy into like, I don't care who's cast in a movie. You know, I learned my lesson with Michael Keaton. He was great. You know,
absolutely.
I expected it to be great, but I was a minority.
I'll judge it once I've seen it, but I'm certainly not going to spend my days, you know, spewing all over social media because I'm unhappy with some actor that got cast as a superhero. Gives a fuck. It's a comic book movie. You know, I mean, love him. Sure, that's great, but it's a comic book movie, you know?
Sure. No, I hear you. In other words, take it for what it is. Even though for a lot of us, we put so much effort into our stories, we want them to seem, I don't know, their own world should be real. I remember a quote from Frazetta where he was talking about how he didn't use reference. I mean, he had a photographic memory. He studied anatomy, so on and so forth. But when he would do his paintings, it was out of his head completely. Yeah. And he was quoted as saying, you know, I'm not trying to do realism. I'm trying to do something that feels real for his fantasy world.
Well, I think when fans started taking this stuff seriously, and certainly when the companies kind of, let everybody into the locker room to see what's going on, with the internet, it's gotten, it's just, I was invested in these comics, in these stories. I still remember, in Justice League of America number 100, it was 7 Soldiers of Victory, one of the 7 soldiers will die. And it's like, who? And Levitz knew because he was working at DC already, but he wouldn't tell us because he wasn't allowed to.
Right.
But it was just, so it was important, but it wasn't life or death, and I wasn't going to go insane because they wound up killing the horse instead of Wing or whatever it was.
Right. Right.
It's in the context of comic books in the story. Yes, it's exciting and important, but once you put down the comic book, it's like, so what's for dinner?
Right. It is what it is. What you're saying, Yeah. Rory, the other wizard of wordplay, I'm sure you have a compelling question for our honored guest tonight.
So many. Firstly, thank you for writing about the Titanic. It's what gave Scott and I a job. And because our rating of the Coast Guard.
Gotcha. Titanic, yes.
What's it like having your own Wikipedia page?
Isn't everyone?
I don't know. I'm about to. I should probably start one.
I found out about it about a dozen years ago. I looked at it. It was all wrong, so I fixed it. And I don't.
My net worth is way more.
And I don't think I've looked at it or added to it since. So I don't know.
Hopefully somebody else is
having
keeping
a Wikipedia page a thing.
I don't have one, but people have been trying to put together one for me for years, and it hasn't happened.
You're a girl.
I know. I'm a Goyle.
This makes her special.
Poor Barb.
I guess my next question: what was the most fun project you worked on, either alone or in a team? But what did you get the most out of? It was a learning experience, or you just.
I think Life with Archie was probably. I think it was just a consistently. I think I did a real good job on that book, and and just, I'm proud of that one, and I enjoyed doing it. It was, it was a great experience working with the Archie guys. Was was wonderful. I was given my head to write whatever I want. I mean, we get together every 6 months and we plot out the next story arc, but I'd go in there with suggestions for everything from killing Miss Grundy to that's right, I killed Miss Grundy, I forgot about her.
You're so bloodthirsty.
To gun violence storyline, Cheryl Blossom with breast cancer storyline, so no matter what I suggested, there's like, go ahead, great. I mean, that's how the death came up. At the end of we know the book's coming to an end, and we're plotting out the last arc, and the publisher goes, so how are we gonna go out on this? And everybody's throwing suggestions out. There's like 5 people in the room, and somebody says, let's kill him, and then about 10 minutes later, John kind of says, kill him. We could kill him. And I went, hell yeah, let's, because I love a good bloodbath. But it's, so.
Ryan says, hello, everyone. How are you?
Hey, Ryan.
Good to
how
see
you doing?
Paul,
Hey, Ryan.
Look forward to having you on the show next weekend, is what Ryan says. And he also says, hello, Barbara.
Weekend? Jesus.
Shout out.
Thank
Put it
you,
in your calendar,
Ryan.
Paul.
Check the calendar, Ryan.
Right. Oh, yeah, here I am. Wow. The 30th.
It is indeed.
All right.
So, Aaron, your turn, my friend. Throw us out a compelling question for Mr. Kupperberg. I know you've got.
So I don't have any. I don't follow DC or Marvel that much. So I'm just
okay.
He's done more than just.
Ask a writing.
I've never heard of you either. So there.
The romances of Paul Kupperberg.
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know about that one.
Yeah.
Rob, what about you, my friend?
I worked on that one.
The only thing I can think of is it seems to me that comics aren't fun anymore. The Marvel and DC, I don't know if they're too serious and too grim and gritty. What would you, as an editor or a writer, what would you do to make comics fun again? What do you think comics need to do to become fun again?
Well, I think first of all, we're not the audience.
True.
We are old farts.
Yeah.
We like what we like from when we liked it. That's not what the audience is looking for today. I mean, every now and then, a story is fun or like that is fun, or they'll read the old stuff and how quaint, but this is what the audience, I was going to say this is what the audience is buying, but I think that's
Yeah.
That's kind of part of my question.
Yeah.
What can we do to make it more interesting to more people, or can we even do that?
I don't think
anymore?
we can. I think comics it has reached its adult form in some ways. The monthlies will sell to who they sell to, and that will continue to be a diminishing market, I think. And the online stuff will move. The graphic novels are selling very well. Collected editions and graphic novels do very well. So it's just the definition of comics is just going to continue to change. I mean, according to Paul Levitz, we've already gone through 3 major shifts in the marketplace. In my lifetime of comics, the shift from newsstand to
direct market,
direct market, and and then the internet. Well, the internet's the latest one. There's another one in there somewhere, but it all makes sense. The market has to evolve. We're what are we? Coming on a 90-year-old medium.
Yeah, movies also aren't what they used to be, and aren't pulling in the audiences they used to.
And again,
so
we're not the audience.
True.
The movies we like are probably going to show up in art houses or just going to run on Netflix from now on. Superhero movies, but the movies have replaced the comic books. I can't tell you the number of people who come up to me at conventions or whatever and say, I'm a big comic book fan. I go, yeah, what do you read? And they go, oh no, I don't read the comics. I watch the movies. To them, that's being a comic book fan.
Yeah.
Okay, well, take it away.
That's leads me to what Fruitbat says. The audience isn't buying, is what Fruitbat says, and he's saying that, and you've touched on this. Could it be that because there's so many options now that everybody's got their own niche market almost. Everybody's got their own thing they like. There's no longer this sort of overarching popularity, except for the big names.
Sure. I think there's some truth to that. The fragmentation is you see it in television. It used to be, I think it's kind of, I hate to sound, grand about this, but I think there was kind of like all that's going on is kind of helping to lead to the dissolution of kind of, civility almost, bonds between people. Like when I was growing up, we all watched the same thing because it was only, 3 channels. And so, I watched Ed Sullivan to see the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and whatever else, and the comedians and stuff. And my parents were watching ballet and pop singers and Broadway excerpts on the Ed Sullivan Show. We were all watching the same thing. So I not only got my culture, I was getting big doses of their culture as well.
Right.
The result,
Yeah.
I know who well, back then Jack Benny actually was still a star, but but
Yeah.
now if you go up to a 20-something and say Jack Benny, they'll go, who?
Yeah. So the fragmentation is part of it, but I guess the plus side of the fragmentation that we talk about on the stream a lot is that if you can find that small market that supports what you're doing as a creator and it can sustain you, you can make a living off of it, now is probably the best time to ever do something like that because we have a worldwide market through the internet. Is that fair to say?
To some extent, but it's when I started writing, my first sales were to Charlton Comics in 1975. I sold a bunch of horror short stories, and then I started writing for DC, and as a consequence, I stopped writing for Charlton because DC paid 3 times the page rate. But I also abandoned trying to get work from Gold Key and from Warren and other companies. And so I wound up with all my eggs in one basket. And for a while it was fine, it was comfortable, and then it wasn't.
Right.
So even that small, if you find that small market, how long are they going to stay with you? They're going to outgrow this stuff. They're going to move on to the next thing. So it's diminishing returns.
It is. Fruitbat says the big names are dying on the vine. Yes, we need to make comics fun again. I mean, when I can't give a superhero comic to my boys because the content isn't suitable, what do you do? Well, yeah, he's got a point. What do you say to folks who say, I need, I want something that I can give the kids and not worry about this or that or the other?
It is out there. I think it's out there to a certain extent. Although, even DC, they took the, they took Scooby-Doo and Flintstones and, made them real.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What about over in Japan, that market is massive. What are they doing that we are not?
They didn't stigmatize comic books.
Yep.
America
the 1950s screwed us. Yep.
Yeah, well, in the 40s they were kind of acceptable. Adults could read them. Certainly, GIs were reading them by the ton. Overseas, and adults, could pick up a comic book. But by the time the war was over and we were getting into the late 40s, it was you could see the stuff turning more juvenile. I mean, it was pretty juvenile to begin with, but
sure.
It was just turn, and then by the 50s, they became evil, and nobody respectable would read them, and again at the time they were still selling 1 million copies or 800,000 copies of Superman or Action Comics, but that I've seen numbers over the years, where you could just every year by year you could see the dip. Detective Batman was on the verge of cancellation in 1960.
Well, is it fair to say that maybe the fragmentation and the people outgrowing the old way of telling those stories and the old-fashioned comic style, maybe they will begin to embrace comics the way the Japanese have, and maybe their stigmatization will fade? Do you think with the new generations? Is that
maybe?
Too much
I hope
for?
so. I hope
Yeah.
so. I mean, there's manga sells pretty well in this country. I mean, but again, what's pretty well? What's a top manga number in this country?
Aaron,
you're our manga expert. What do you think would
what's
be
the top title selling?
Yeah,
The top title selling right now would probably be Demon Slayer.
Okay.
And
what kind of numbers do you think it's doing?
The top selling comic is actually Dogman.
Yeah,
right
check it
now.
out, Dean. See if it's online.
Dogman's
Yeah.
by Scholastic.
Okay.
Viz Media does Demon Slayers. Now you're talking, American, but you also have to realize it's much more outlets. So I mean, you also can go buy a Demon Slayer from like Target.
They're saying
That's
five.
great.
They're
That's awesome.
saying
Yeah.
as
Right.
far as numbers go, they're saying 5 million estimated
5 million.
sales. 5 million.
That's
But you have to remember, manga was an imitation of American art. The guy who created
Sure.
manga was trying to imitate Disney,
right.
and so it wasn't. It didn't have, like you said, the stigmatization of that word that American comics had. Americans have always had this sort of idea, and you can almost probably draw this back to the humanist movement coming into America, of the sort of intellectualism that came with like philosophy and stuff. The philosophes, that the idea of like anything that had pictures was considered
frivolous,
non-educational, frivoless.
Yeah,
and that came from the intellectual pursuit of. I mean, because history lesson. I mean, America is founded on humanist movements. The country itself. So the idea of like, we are above animals, we are human, we are intelligent, and so anything that would we wanted to engage ourselves with intellectual, complicated ideas, and books were the most sophisticated. Books are still the best way to convey an abstract, complicated ideas. Pictures, it takes a little harder sometimes. I mean, being a,
listen,
like
I put together IKEA furniture. I know what you're saying.
Right? Yeah. But when I mean, my minor was in philosophy, and I was writing, and my comic that I wrote, I do write about philosophy. Which I don't find hardly any of that in comics. Some in manga, you get a decent amount in European, but I do think American comics have also leaned into the stigmatization or the juvenile by not writing or addressing ideas you would find in books. They stray away from that because they seem more interested, sometimes I feel, in sales than in actually making literature. I mean, when you talk about classic
there is
literature,
no interest in making literature.
No, like
yeah,
Kill a Mockingbird.
There's no interest in it.
Right, of Mice and Men, the Kill a Mockingbird, famous literature, they just,
those were wrote
they
to sell
never
books.
cared.
They
And
wrote
so
those to sell books.
Is to sell books. Those are sort of classic because they're challenging and complex ideas, things that comics stray away from. And I do think superheroes could have done that. They could have challenged more ideas or whatever, but instead they just attacked or focused on black and white ideas. I think it was something that I think was an opportunity lost, actually.
Yeah, no, they definitely it was all trivialized and infantilized. To a large extent. I mean, you can't read a Jack Schiff Batman story from the late 1950s and think that the audience. I mean, I have recently looked back at some of those old stories, and there's nothing there. They don't. It's just like literally they move from point A to point B to point C to point D, and that's it. I mean,
Andy.
It's all plot, no characterization.
It's all plot, no characterization.
It's all, no characterization, right?
There were stories there where it's like, what's the bad guy's name? They don't even mention the bad guy's name. He's doing some dastardly thing, manipulating people's minds or whatever, and they don't even bother giving this guy a name.
This Fruitbat says Japan lets the book age with the audience, then start a new series with the new generation. So a book that starts with one generation of 12-year-olds isn't suitable 20 years later. So he's
Harry
making
Potter
the
did
point.
that too.
Yeah, Harry Potter.
Harry Potter did that as well. Yeah.
Japan does that a little bit. Yeah, but I mean, Japan also. I mean, well, this was an anime, but like the one of the Firefly. It was about kids surviving Hiroshima.
Okay.
It's a movie. Stuff about like Appleseed Ghost in the Shell. I mean, they are attacking. You have stuff for kids, but there's stuff that they're like again attacking intellectualized. Right. And adults just, I mean, I give a comic to a kid and they immediately think, like most people, well, this is for kids. Mm-hmm. And that's something, and we uphold it. And by giving so much money to Disney, which has locked that image into America and has never let it go, has caused so much damage or detriment mentally to people's view on comics and stuff, that it's like, if you want to do anything that's not suitable for kids, you might should just give up and go to either Europe or Japan. to do it.
Or
Because in
do
America,
mouse.
it's just not going to work.
Or do mouse.
Mouse, but even Mouse is like, it's a popular book, but is it a big seller? Is it? If you ask most comic book people if they know Mouse, non-comic book people, never heard of it.
Right,
Never
right.
heard of
So what you're talking about, again, we've touched on this before too, Paul. It's an interesting discussion. We're talking about commercial art, fine art, the balance. And, you know, a lot of us want to do a combination of both. Sometimes you just want to do popcorn. Sometimes you want to do a thought-provoking thing. And there's room for all of it. And what we
art
talk
is
about
art.
is,
You know, you can categorize it as much as you want. You
Sure.
can, you know, you can assign it labels and names, but you know, if you create something, it's art. It may not be good art, it may not be high art, or whatever the hell that is.
Right.
You know, if comic books are so low, why was Lichtenstein ripping them off? You know, you know, I mean, he was probably being ironic or something. But you know, there's the elements of comics have been seeping into our society, you know, really mainly since, you know, Batman. I mean, we are still, you know, we are still holy this, holy that, and pow zap bam, you know, 60 years later.
I think strange enough, the one thing that's starting to give a little bit of relevance to comics, as dumb as it is the format it's in. When you give when you gave the floppies, people literally thought they were pamphlets.
Mm-hmm.
You would, you know, like, well, there's a pamphlet, and the pamphlet has the information you need, and you toss it away. Again, this is why so many old comics are so rare, because everybody threw them away, and they were almost meant to be thrown away. I mean, they were on cheap paper. You buy them, you throw them away.
No, it was disposable.
Right.
Just
right.
like
So even the
just
format.
like the pulp magazine.
I mean, when you put, like, let's say you take a Superman run and put it into a nice pristine omnibus with a hardback, doesn't it sometimes, for some odd reason, seem a little more important than it should be?
Absolutely.
Because it's so bound together. Exactly.
Yeah. You know, the printing is better, the binding is beautiful.
Exactly. So I think there's presentation
it's an omnibus,
also matters.
for God's sake.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you look at they repackaged a lot of the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams Batman, recolored it and reissued. I've got the hardbacks on my shelf, and because they were a big influence on me, and it's really it's nicer to have it that way, because if I had the original, I mean, I'd probably sell it for the money, but if I had the original, you'd see it was decayed, and the coloring was off, and the registration, and this, that, and the other. So I kind of appreciate the fact that DC went back to some of these classics and repackaged them. You know,
my only issue with that stuff is they don't do enough of mine. So
they do. I had to admit, they do pick out certain ones, and most omnibuses are runs from like late 80s or 90s. They have a hard time going back. I mean, we don't even have a hardcover omnibus of the Dark Phoenix saga. I mean, that's kind of silly. You can find a paperback, you can find it collected in an omnibus, but a nice hardback version of like one of the most classic. No, we don't have that. Not that I know of.
That surprises me. I seem to remember seeing that they had made one of those.
Maybe at some time. I'm not sure. I mean, they could have. But I mean, there's such classic stories. I mean, when they finally
you know,
put
it's
out
all
the
about
Crisis.
the money. I imagine they would put that together just to try and make some money off of it. But I think it has been done. But
there's a lot of Bronze Age DC though that they've done that with. So maybe they're working their way up, Aaron.
Yeah, I just wrote an introduction to the House of Mystery omnibus that includes the Dollar Comics run. You know, goes into the beginning of that, which is where I started. I used to write the introductions for those Dollar Comic House of Mysteries. So.
I want to ask you, Paul, because you'll be helpful, I think, with this subject. What was considered healthy sales in each of the time periods where
each of the decades in which you've been working?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, what was the cutoff? Like, if it's not selling this, kill it. I mean, I know that changed.
It changed, and we didn't really talk about that much back in the 70s and stuff. I mean, you know, when there were no royalties, you know, I don't care what it sells.
Right.
As long as my check clears, you know. And when I started, I had to sign the back of the check that included the stamp that says, you know, you're signing away all rights.
Yes, you give up all your rights to this character. Right. I remember that very, very well.
Oh, I remember that too.
I'm going to segue here for a little bit because we've been so concentrated on superheroes in DC. But I would like to ask Paul about his non-DC work.
All right.
It was before and after DC. And you and I left DC about the same time.
Yeah,
they shoved everybody out and brought in the whole new crew.
Yeah, I left in 2006. Well, for around 2001, I moved out of DCU because enough was enough. I mean, you know, how much Dan Raspler can any human being take? I moved into the licensed special projects, licensed publishing, and I did that for the last few years I was there. But I left in 2006 to go to Weekly World News.
Really? I did not realize you went to Week. And then after that, catch us up on your life after DC.
Well, after that, I had been doing some writing for Weekly World News, you know, articles here and there. And they were looking to make a change and bring the staff to New York. You know, it was being published down in Florida, in Boca. And, you know, the Anthrax building. Famous American Media Anthrax building.
Nice. Okay.
That was Weekly World News. So whole change of staff. I was hired as executive editor, and we brought in Bob Greenberger came on staff as well, managing editor. Wow. Maddie Klaustein, who was in DC's you know, production department doing photoshopping and all that stuff. We hired her to be our photo editor, and we hired someone from DC's production department to be our you know, designer. So it was like, you know, working with old friends, and I was there for a year and a half. Did a lot of stuff, wrote a lot for them. Was trying to. The paper was losing. Speaking of circulation, was losing numbers bad. And also the distribution, you know, Walmart was a main outlet, and Walmart, you know, sucks money out of a product whether it sells or not. So I had worked up some deals. We had a $50,000 contract with Random House for books. We had a deal percolating with Dark Horse to do action figures, you know, Batboy and stuff. And best of all, I had cut a deal with Diamond to distribute Weekly World News in comic shops. They were going to take 2,000 copies a week, which would have literally put the paper back into the black. But the distributor, paper's distributor, which is owned by the company that owns the you know, newspaper itself, AMI, they nixed it because, you know, I might actually you know, show them up. So anyway, they wound up the paper wound up dying in August of 2007, and then I went freelance for a while. Did a short stint at DC working and in their collected editions department. I was literally putting together collected editions. I was, you know, doing the book maps and doing the dummies, you know, Xeroxing all the stories and putting them together. And, you know, so I must have done, you know, like 40 of those. I think. Wow. Never wound up being published. But, and while I was there, I got a call. Somebody, the switchboard, the receptionist knew that I knew a lot of, you know, stuff about DC and go good for information. So she passed a call on to me from an editor at World Wrestling, WWE. And he said, yeah, we were starting a kids magazine and we need an editor to do, you know, comics and cartooning, blah, blah, you know, can you guys recommend anybody? And I recommended me, and wound up getting hired, which was cool because WWE was 10 minutes away from my house here in Stamford, Connecticut. That only lasted about a month, 2.5 months, because they're idiots. But then I went back to freelancing, and you know, pretty much been doing that ever since.
You killed Archie.
and I killed Archie. Bastard. He was wearing a hoodie and carrying a bag of Skittles. I had to take
You were saying something before we came live here that you had interviews from people as far away from India about killing Archie.
Oh yeah. No, I was getting calls, from India, from all over Europe, Philippines. I was doing interviews all over the world. How could you kill Archie? Well, we're not really. It's kind of like first of all, he's not real, and the version of Archie I'm killing is a less real version of Archie than even the not real main version of Archie.
So
that went
what
over
did
like a lead balloon, I bet.
What did they? What did that do for circulation for you, Paul?
It didn't do diddly squat. The book was canceled.
It's just sort of different when you kill Superman, right? That's a different thing altogether.
Well, that was that was a stupid accident.
Tell us about that.
Well, I remember the day the story broke. I think it was in like November of whatever year it was, and it was a slow news day. Just happened to be a slow news day, and DC released the Death of Superman press release, and suddenly it's the end of the world, and it became the biggest event. I think that thing wound up selling like 7 million copies or something, because everybody bought a lot of copies because they knew they'll be scarce and they can sell them later.
I still have a couple of copies.
Copies.
Everybody.
I have a copy. Actually, it's just right over there. I have a copy that's still in the original manila envelope from DC with the letters from DC saying, we thought we better give you guys copies of this.
Yeah.
And
now most people wound up with stacks of them, straightening tables around their house.
Yeah.
Just for the record, that was 1992.
Yeah.
Is when that happened.
A few years ago.
That was like my second year up at DC on staff.
And was that something that everyone you make it sound like nobody really expected that to blow up? It was just
nobody did, because DC had killed Superman like a dozen times before, and he always got better, and nobody ever made a stink about it.
Right.
It was like we'll kill the hero, he'll get better. Nobody expected anything. I believe, it wasn't planned to be this. It felt like years. It really felt like that story just went on for years. It was as long as the trial of the Flash. But nobody, they just kept adding to it. It's like, oh, this is going well. Nobody thought this, the
was gonna. There was like a happy accident.
There's a funeral for a friend, and then the resurrection, and
yeah.
There was all the different Supermen for a while, and
Superman
spin-off. Was Mike Carlin, I believe, was editing those at the time. Do you remember? Was it Mike? I think it was.
Yeah.
He was
a competitor of the Superman, and ran the Superman books into the ground. I mean, he ran the Superman books
into the ground. Wow. And then
like 40 bazillion crossovers.
Not too long after that, we had Batman breaking his back, if you remember, as well. So then that happened. But yeah, that seemed to be the event decade. I know a lot of our younger folks, that's when you guys were reading, right? Scott, Rory, you guys were reading at that time, right? When all the Death of Superman, Batman breaking his back, all that stuff. What did you guys think of that? I mean, did that get you into it, or are you like, this is such a gimmick, whatever?
So I just knew they would come back. It didn't really affect me at all. I'm just
it was kind of too incredulous.
Oh, DC just killed one of its cash cows, and he'll never be back.
Right.
Ever.
Well, that's the end of that.
Move along. What's
I guess I'm done.
That's Bob Kane. Ha
ha. Exactly.
Well, that was always kind of one of my problems reading, not even superheroes, this continuous sequel, like sequential books that gone for decades, that you never really can do anything to the characters to cause permanent change or things to the story. One of the, I mean, like people like, when do you quit reading comics? Like when you get bored, I guess, because they'll keep going forever.
Yeah.
Especially American comics.
You have to give the illusion of change.
Right.
You know,
but there was no payoff. Like you read a story, like how's this going to end? But it never ends. So there's no big payoff, and that was a little frustrating to me sometimes as a reader.
It's not my idea, Aaron, because I've said this before too, and this is not my original idea. Why have they never, like the big guys especially, why have they never run a chronological story? Let them age, let them get old, let them die, let them and then end it and start it over.
There's people have done that, but the
because
DC
money.
Because money. I feel, the guy who did Cerberus, Dave Sim, did that.
Copyright, trademark,
and how are you progressing? How are you aging the guy? Are you aging him in real time? Because that's excruciating. Well, yeah, but I mean that's the question. Like that.
I feel like closer to real time. I mean, because you have these. Aaron says these guys that live forever. I mean, we got Bruce Wayne or Tony Stark that they're 90 years old, and well, I know we have to suspend. They live in another time world, but I would be interested in a story that went year by year, or maybe some sort of alteration of it, but closer to a real progression, and let them age and let them pass the torch, or
like Old Man Logan,
right? Well, and then let them die, and then we can all agree. We all know that the Batman storyline ended.
Well, that's why the Dark Knight Returns was so popular, because Frank Miller did do a sort of ending to the series per se. In other words, it was not a permanent ending, but it was a sort of like, well, if this ended, this could be a way this could end.
This could be a way to end it.
And so there was
and then he came back and did it again.
It's not an ending; it's a resolution.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's missing from a lot of stories. I mean, when you start reading any story, you buy into the story wondering how it's going to end. And if it never ends, then it's kind of like you're sitting there in a moment of tension. This basically, you're sitting at the moment of climax, like the whole time. It's like resolution, climax of a story.
You're edging.
Yeah. And so getting close to the resolution.
We just lost our affiliate.
We lost our
everyone.
So,
we're done.
I mean, I've never understood
don't know what that really means.
Most manga does go, I think the most is 26 volumes. There's some that are still going, but they do eventually end in some capacity and move on.
Because then we have like the Simpsons who they've been on for 35 years, and they flash back to the 70s, they flash back to the 80s, they flash back to the 90s, they flash back
while you're aging the character, so you're going to have a guy who's aging in real time, and you're the audience following isn't going to want to read this old guy. I know, but so how often do you start books like that? I mean,
that's a good question.
It's not practical. There are, Gunsmoke, ran for 16 years. Bonanza,
20 years.
Yeah, so and nothing ever changed. And what audience want? They think they want something new. But if you change it, they get pissed. I mean, I remember in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, it was like, us young fans, us kids, we were going, Robin has been a baby, a little boy for, and then so they aged Dick Grayson, they sent him off to college, and we were outraged. Because you don't want what you think you want, because if you got what you thought you wanted, you'd think we were boring.
Well, what about the multiple solution to that, though? There's an obvious solution. You have different titles. You have Scott's old guy version where the guy's aging in real time. You have the one where he never changes. You have the one where the kids take over and pass the torch, and have all the titles running at the same time.
You're not taking the fan mentality into consideration. They want all of it. And they're not going to be able to afford to buy all of it, because you obviously have to start a new book every month to keep up with with the aging possibilities. So
and comics. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you.
No, but that's it. It's just if somebody comes up to you and says, what I want to see in the book is, first you tell them to bug off because none of their freaking business. I'm the writer, not you, you little punk bastard. Take the job if you think you can get it. But you don't want to give them what they tell you they want, because then you're boring, you're dull. They predicted this. I knew that was coming. Sure, that's what you've been whining for, you grubby little.
Well, there's a little bit of a little bit of a difference in stories too. Comic book story, it's all about the characters. The stories, they tell stories of like Batman, but like you do like a lot of books and a lot of other stories, the main characters are intertwined with the plot, and there's an ending to the character, if that makes sense. I mean, nobody, like, for instance, like I'll just pick Mice and Men because I like that story. When you got to the ending of that one, there was no sequel. You didn't really care about what happened to the guy that left that story per se, because the story was wrapped around that guy.
You never saw the Lenny Zombie movie?
No, I never did. Right. But I mean, the characters are intricately tied to the plot and the story. Where comic books, the characters are a little pulled, yeah.
But there are exceptions. I mean, serialized storytelling is obviously, has a long history. Dickens was doing it.
does it. Radio started doing it. I mean,
yeah, Dickens was doing it. Most authors in the 19th century were serialized in newspapers before they published them as books. Right. Sure, but I mainly write novels. Short stories and novels these days. Writing, I'm currently working on a story that has kind of a superhero angle. Not kind of a superhero angle. It's kind of like, if I could write a Superman novel, this is what it would be.
Oh.
And
excellent.
Let's hope. And but there is so much more that you can do in a novel. Comic books can't even come close.
Oh yeah.
Unless you want to stop the story dead, and have a guy just thinking 800 word board balloons full of thoughts all the time, and you can't do it in comic books. But in a novel, you can carry this character, and you can find out, right down to to the deepest thoughts, what's going on with him. And it's not this kind of like self-explanatory bullshit. The kind of like, well, as you know, I blah 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 blah. Well, if I know, I don't need to hear it.
Exposition.
But you can do this in a novel. You can bring this background information in during a conversation. You just you throw it in there.
Or even writing, you could say, some guy like Sam walks through the door, of his mother's house, who's been struggling with like alcohol things. I mean, you can go off on these side tangents to fill in a little bit of background, like of his mother, which would look really weird if some guy showed a picture of a guy walking through a store, and then what would you draw? If somebody was like, besides, let's tell a little history of this lady, draw a picture of the lady, and then go. Books are much easier to break the fourth wall and talk to the reader, and then go back to the story. Where comics, that's very hard to do.
I wrote a mystery novel called The Same Old Story, which is set in the comic book industry in the 1950s. And one of the scenes is about this pulp detective that my protagonist writes, which was a cop based on his father. And the scene is set in a diner with the cop getting information from the waitress and stuff, but eating pie because he really likes pie. It's my favorite scene in the book. The information could have, in a comic book, it would have been like, Jack Webb, just the facts man. Here I got to give personality to two characters you'll never see again, but still, they're alive now. They're not just, little background things against which, your character is being placed.
Right.
It's way richer, much more satisfying. And, after 1,400 comic book stories, I'm good. I've done it.
Movies are really good at doing that because of acting. I mean, one of my favorite scenes is De Niro and Pacino in Heat when they meet up in the bar, and You guys, I'm
Yeah.
sure have seen Heat. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they're talking. But I mean, I was actually thought like trying to translate Quentin Tarantino's dialogue to a comic. I think you could, but I do think you'd be missing something from the movie. So every medium has a strength, but novels
Absolutely.
go very
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
One of the things that I think we do have an advantage in comic books is that we can
Even
do
superhero
special.
novels should be known.
Oh, I like it. I like.
No.
I think you can do special stories too, Aaron, where, you know, like Kingdom Come, if you've read that, that's like its own special event story. It may or may not be in continuity depending on what they decide this month. But, you know, you can do special stories where you can do all these things that the serialized ongoing books can't do. And I'm seeing a lot. I'm seeing even at Marvel, like Peter David's back in writing, you know, 1980 Spider-Man in the black suit. Why? Because there's a market for 1980 Spider-Man in the black suit, you know, and he's selling enough of them to keep doing this thing. So, you know, it's crazy how these niche markets, the fragmentation we were talking about earlier, does support breaking these rules that we're talking about that are so.
But, and also, but even with those events, events are locked into, you're locked into that story. You're locked into that universe. You can change these characters, but the expectations of these characters are set before you've even opened the cover, because you know who Superman is, you know who Batman is. You may be surprised at the turns they take, and you know a writer like Wade is definitely going to keep his characters in character. You know, so there's not going to be a problem with that, but you're still reliant on that. You're still going into it with that, you know, with that baggage.
Right.
Are they still doing the black label at DC? Because I know that was
probably not.
Yeah, because that was supposed to be, they were taking like the European format of books, and which I thought was interesting. I thought some of the stories were interesting there.
It seemed mostly it seemed mostly to show Batman's penis. I mean, that seemed to be.
Oh yeah.
There was that one. There's
Watchmen beat them years before that, so you know.
Yeah, but that was a blue penis, and it didn't.
That's true. Batman's penis isn't blue.
Frankly, I didn't look closely.
In December in Gotham.
There is actually Black Label going on. This is Jock's latest effort. This is number 2, One Dark Night, and they're doing it in this large magazine format.
Yeah,
so
that's a European periodical format.
Right. Yeah. Right. And they're doing it, I mean, because it's selling enough for them to do it. But again, special events, you know, they're not, it's not going to go on and on and on.
Probably. No, but it definitely, you can see that again format. It's perfect bound, so it looks a little nicer than a floppy. Yeah. So I mean, European comics have been doing that for years. I mean, they put out what 5-6 issues a year, but I mean they take their time and make it.
Sure.
European comics, though, they'll publish all sorts of crazy stuff half the time. I love reading them. I don't understand half the stories because they're very
strange.
I remember reading one where this girl in this fantasy world died, and then she broke in the ferrets, and I was like, "Wait, what? Why is she a bunch of ferrets now?" And the guy's like, "Well, yeah, you know these elves, whatever, when they die, turn into ferrets. Like this is common knowledge in the story." I'm like, "Okay, and they never explained it. Why she turns into ferrets?" I'm like, "All right, that's cool."
Have you ever read any, Aaron? Have you ever read any House of Mystery stuff where it sort of allowed for the beginning, middle, end, and not ongoing storytelling that you're talking about?
I used to just I need to go back, but I used to just get stacks of comics in the library.
I just added those to my cart. That looks incredible.
And so I just and I read all sorts of crazy stuff. I might have read stuff in there, but that's where I read most of the graphic novels and a lot of European graphic novels and stuff. My library just carries all, like I said, one of my favorite ones was one called Marzi. I think it was called Marzi. And it's about this girl that wrote about her. She grew up in Poland before the communist, right during the communist fall, where it fell, and she just wrote stories about her as a child growing up in a communist country, going through that, and it was absolutely fascinating. And I've never seen that in a comic book store in America. I've only seen it at the library. I've never seen it. Again, I feel that's a little missed opportunity because, I mean, like I know a lot of people in the World War II, and if they did comics like about more history or whatever, I mean, we could probably get more readers in the comic stores if they had other stuffs about like history, or I mean, we do romance, but I mean other stuff, which I think Wolf Hunter, our comic, can do that.
Yeah,
but,
Wolf Hunter does that. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So,
well, Steam Patriots is so fascinating to me because it mixes the concept of the very popular concept of steampunk, but it is also historically accurate in the Revolutionary War. And after we're all done here, if we can get Paul's address, you can ship him some of your books.
I would love to do that.
Yeah, we can do that.
That would be very cool. That would be very
Thanks,
cool.
Mark.
So, Paul,
Good
what's your favorite as we wrap up the show? Just about what are some of your favorite inspirations? Do you go to the classics and read? Do you read pulp? Do you read mystery, thriller, action adventure? Do you go back to superhero stuff? What do you read to get inspired?
I don't need to read to get inspired. I'm going to write no matter what. Like, it's there.
Awesome.
I read. I read to feel bad about myself because other people do it so much better. And I, my favorite authors are Jack London, Philip Roth, William Goldman, Somerset Maugham, Pete Hamill. Those
and
are
Arthur Conan Doyle, right? I mean, who doesn't like Sherlock Holmes?
I haven't read much Holmes, actually. I've been thinking about taking a stab at it. I also read a lot of nonfiction. I'm currently reading Arthur Marx's biography of Bob Hope. So
cool. That does sound cool.
Groucho's son writing about Bob Hope. So
wow.
Well, I want to open the floor one last time before we have to go. Rob, did you have a specific question for Paul or comment or
no?
I'll get you that $5, Rob. I told you. Let it go.
No, during the discussion, I had an inspirational moment or an epiphany about why perhaps Marvel and DC continue to don't let their characters age like you're expecting, Aaron. It's because it's because the corporation is the creator.
Oh yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? If you had a writer who created a story and went to a publisher and they just published that story, that's one thing. But in comic books, the corporation buys the character and becomes the creator, and so that's why. Of course, a corporation doesn't die. It doesn't grow or doesn't change. So they're just worried about making money on the character. They're not worried about telling a decent story. They just want to make money off it. So when you create a story like Dickens did, he wrote a beginning, a middle, and an end. But I mean, it was serialized. But still, when he finished a book, it was done. Those characters, he was done with them. So he moved on to something else. Corporations don't do that. When this writer finishes writing his version of Batman, they bring in another guy to do it again, to write their version of Batman.
What we used to call characters are now called intellectual property.
Yeah,
intellectual property, exactly.
Properties.
IPs.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
well,
that's my observation.
I have no problem with when I went to work for DC, I knew the rules going in.
Sure.
And so I was fine with it. I signed the back of the check. I did whatever.
Nothing wrong with it. It's just an
and
observation.
a few years later, they said, okay, here, we will pay you. I just got my royalty statement for this quarter. It's not a fortune, but
the strange enough, I'll leave you with a dumb thought. So as you grow up reading kids' books, all the characters in kids' books are kids. Most of the characters in books are adults. So why are the characters in comics teenagers then?
Because
if you're going to read kids' books and then you graduate into reading comic books as a teenager, then so I always thought it was funny, like these, like I even as a kid, and they are a lot of teenagers, but I always thought it was funny. I'm like, I'm reading about adults.
All kids' literature is aspirational. Kids don't want to read about their own age. They want to read about the next level up. They want to read about their big brother.
Oh yeah, I know, but it just seems weird because I thought because I've written some kids books and researching kids books. I'm like, there's no adults. in a kid's book. And yet, when we go to comic books, you immediately go to adult.
Well,
like
in
what you said,
Peanuts, there are
but
adults.
there was not a lot of. Yeah. But strangely enough, young adult literature mostly is young adults and teenagers in the books, but not in comics. I don't know. Weird observations, but I've noticed those things.
Except for kids' comics.
Yeah, kids comics. Like Harry Potter's all teenagers, that's young adult. Twilight was all teenagers, that's young adult.
Right.
Sure, like comics is adult.
At 10, you don't want to read about yourself. You want to read about your big brother.
Yeah. I don't know. I just always thought it was weird.
Well, guys, I want to appreciate. Thank you, Paul, for being so kind to share your time and your wisdom with us. We appreciate it, and we like to close our show before the bumper by saying.
you prepared, right, Paul?
You're not the fat lady anyway.
We do say, make mine
Silverline. Make mine Silverline.
Good night, everybody.
Hi, I'm Greg Horn. Make mine Silverline.